Well, hello, shiny, crafty people. It's Tim Totten here, and welcome back to the channel. You may be able to tell by how I've set some things up that today I want to talk about quilts, and specifically about old quilts. You see, I love making quilts. I've made dozens of them so far, and they don't stay in my life very long because we tend to make quilts that we give away to other people. And so whenever I see old quilts anywhere, I automatically think the same things that I would think about my own quilts. I wonder who made this. I wonder what was going on in their life at the time and who they made it for. How much love went into stitching this quilt? How did they pick the fabrics? Why did they choose that particular design? And did they love doing it? Was it a labor of love or a necessity? I want to know all those things. Well, I got the opportunity to chat with a friend of mine, Kathy Lee, who is a friend, but also the mother of another good friend of mine. And so he and I went to the same high school, just a couple years apart. And so Kathy shared that she was going to be letting go of some of the quilts that she had in her collection because she had a lot of them and she wanted to downsize. And so I asked her if I could see them, and there was two that I just really, really loved. And this quilt behind me, you see, is one of those two. She actually gifted this quilt to me, which I thought was just so beautiful. And then I offered to buy another quilt from her, this one. Now, too often when we go into a thrift store or somewhere else and we see the fruit of someone's hard work and love and effort, there's no way to know anything about the person who did it. And so I asked Kathy if she'd tell me a little bit. So even though these don't have labels on them yet, I am going to make a video in a little while about how to put a label on an old quilt. I do want to share a little bit of the story. Kathy's grandmother was named Margaret Anne Reister. She was born in the Wheeling, West Virginia area. She came from a very, very poor family, and she lived in one of those areas where people married young because they had to, out of necessity. She did marry young, and even though they didn't have very much, her husband was a very hard worker. They raised three young girls, daughters, up to become good citizens of their own, and her husband worked hard enough that when he retired as a vice president of the B&O Railroad. It's pretty impressive. She was very crafty, her grandmother. Margaret Anne was extremely crafty. Not only was she able to scrap things together, she crocheted, she made clothes, she made quilts, and she was very proud of how well she was able to make do. Not only did she eventually have a house full of Pennsylvania house furniture, but also Currier and Ives dishes, and there were handmade quilts on every single bed in the house. So the pattern behind me, which I don't know the name of it, but it's all of these triangular points with these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, octagon white pieces, and all of these come together, and it's all been beautifully pieced, and it has been mostly hand stitched, although I do see a little bit of sewing machine stitching. This particular pattern is definitely mostly hand stitched, and in fact, because of the way this is all 30-60 triangle, 30 and 60 degree angles, this all had to be done pretty much by hand. I don't think she pieced any of this with a sewing machine. She also described that, Kathy described to me that there were two of these, one on each of the boys' beds, and they had twin beds. And so it would have been done probably in the 40s or 50s. So this is quite an old quilt as well. Now I will tell you, and I'm going to put some of this information into a label for this one. Now look, my love of old quilts really comes because of two influences in my life, my two grandmothers who taught me how to sew. And I have a quilt from one of them here, and this shows you how much different it is. My grandmother, Julie Crow, was a let's get finished quilter. She didn't like all this pattern and everything. She liked the pattern of the fabric, but she didn't like the pattern of having to create all of the different things. She just wanted to, so she would pick up pieces of fabric and just sew them together. And this quilt by her is literally this is a signature quilt, even down to the backing fabric being this sort of Native American style fabric. And there are pieces and parts and little things in this. She would literally just grab a bag of scraps and grab the next square and sew it on, and the next square and the next rectangle and just sew it on. And so many of her quilts have this all over crazy quilt design. It's me. Yeah, I'm in the middle of filming a video. All right, that's what happens when we share space with people. We got interrupted, but I'm back now. So The quilt that my grandmother made is so important to me because every time that I get to use it or just see it even in my house on a rack, it reminds me of her, and it's almost like she's hugging me one more time, which is so important. Which brings me to my idea really about what happens when we hold on to quilts that have been given to us. You see, most quilts are given as gifts, and we don't always explain to people why we made it or when we made it or any other details. And I think it's important that we make sure that we do something to mark our quilts. I'll be doing another video soon about how to properly put labels, but the truth is we should, while we have the ability to, with the quilts that we've been given, we should be making notes of those and holding on to them. They really are the proof of someone's existence and of someone's art, and they're the remnants after they've died of their love for us. And so whenever I see an old quilt, I think someone took the time to piece all of these little pieces together. They sat and chose all the colors to go together. I mean, look at how much work went into choosing the purples to go together and the pinks and the greens and everything else. And they picked a pattern and then they sewed it together and they gifted it to someone else so that that person would have something of beauty that they made, not just something they bought or not just a couple of plain pieces of fabric sewn together to make a quilt. There's a lot of work involved in putting and piecing together a top. And so I think it's important for us to share those stories and keep them going. You know, quilts are very much a part of the fabric of American history. As settlers traveled west in this country, quite often in that long, treacherous journey, people would die. And there wasn't usually a casket running around with people, and they couldn't keep hauling a body another 500 to 1,000 miles until they got to their destination. So quite often, those settlers who had died would be wrapped in a family quilt and buried along the way. That quilt signifying a piece of their family and the love that was left behind with them. Quilts also became a record of a family's life story, as those quilts that were handmade by some members of the family kept getting passed down. When I see a quilt like the one behind me or some of these others, I think about how they're carrying on the legacy of people like Margaret Anne Reister or Juliana Crow, or someone that you love in your family who made a quilt for you. I think it's important to keep those memories alive because it allows that person to have longevity and to still touch the future generations of their family. It's my goal that the quilts that I make for people are treasured by them. Of course, I mean, that's why I spend so much time making them. And I think probably why you do too. And while it's a wonderful experience for me to have made this beautiful item, usually it's given away. And so I have the memory of making it, but I hope the person who snuggles up in that quilt that I've made for them is going to remember what they meant to me, and they'll pass that warm hug of a quilt on to their family as they move along in this life. So if you see an old quilt, I hope you think like I do, wondering about the soul of the person who made that beautiful thing, who labored over all of those stitches, who picked out the pattern and the fabric, and think about the love they must have had to make it for someone else. Until next time, stay crafty. Bye for now.